Okay, let's begin. I think we've got a quorum here. There's some of the committee members are missing, but we'll start and hopefully they'll join in as we move through. What I wanted to do today is I sent out earlier this last week a list of topics and questions to stimulate discussion amongst the committee members and get an idea where each of the members are in terms of what our sort of duties are as relates to Act 173 in the report. What I'd like to do is, move through these questions that were sent out. David and John were nice enough to share their thoughts with us prior to the meeting. So I may start with David, and then we can discuss each of the points and what each of the committee members thinks. Does that sound like a plan?
Jeff, are those all the people that are
Yeah.
These are all the people who are here. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Those initials and then the people on the screen.
Right.
Okay.
So those are the people.
And Gary, and then Ryan and David.
So we're missing
yes.
Sam and Senator Brett.
Right. Okay.
I'm going to.
Yeah, I just want to. Sure, I've never been on this side of the team.
Whole new world.
It is. It's three-dimensional.
All right. Well, let's start moving through this these questions. And the first topic we have some questions for the committee on was reporting and registration. We've heard of some different thoughts and some different styles of how states do registration and reporting for water withdrawals. So, one of the duties that we need to answer is whether the state should adopt the registration or reporting requirement. And that was question one. David, do you want to just go over your thoughts, David or John?
Yeah, David, we talked before the meeting, and it'd be great if David could run through it.
Okay. Our answer to question one was yes, there should be registration, so that we begin to gather information about how prevalent, how widespread, and are there areas of concentration of water withdrawals. Back some time ago, I had worked up estimated pipe flows, and it's a pretty standard across sources in terms of what you can get out of a pipe, in terms of the physics of the situation. And I just used some information, and if you look at the 1-inch pipe size I listed, it's 53,000 gallons a day. And I believe the trigger amount for permitting under the groundwater law is 60,000 gallons a day. So I use that as a rough reference for the discussion throughout the rest of my responses in terms of, where permitting tiers might occur. And obviously, by putting that forward, we were supporting permitting tiers with a general permit up until that 4-inch size. When you can start moving, if you do it all day, all the time, you can start moving 690,000 gallons a day. At which point, I would think that the state had an interest in what the impacts of that kind of withdrawal might be, particularly if it is a small stream, say a second or third order stream. 60,000 gallons a day can have an impact. In answer to question 2 or 3, thought that an immediate reporting requirement should be put in place, and I believe the agency has the authority to do that by rule. They did it with the dams program without any particular legislation in place, and then the registration program went online before the monitoring program went online. The question was also asked whether there should be a moratorium. You might want to do a moratorium on new withdrawals of size, say above that 4-inch diameter pipe.
Why don't we pause because Jeff had to leave the room for a second.
Yeah, sorry.
And
Sam has joined us
Yeah.
here.
So why don't we take it in chunks? So basically,
Yeah, that's what I
so
wanted to do. Sorry.
David he just started talking about the permitting part.
Okay,
So he went through, I think, 1, 2, and 3 all relate to registration.
okay,
So he
yeah.
explained, yes, number 1, and then the thresholds. And maybe, I don't know if you want us to speak a little more to the measuring equipment.
Maybe. I'm sorry I missed.
Yeah, no, I probably should have stopped as soon as I saw you get up.
Yeah. I mean, the pipeline, I mean, it's self-explanatory. I mean, basically, what was written there is like the idea of thresholds, obviously.
Yeah.
Trying to provide some information on how to tier even a registration program. And so anyway, I don't know how you want to.
Anyhow, and the questions didn't set up in a means to give a structure, but I see there are 2 things that the state needs to do. One is have a permitting system, develop and establish a permitting system, both general permit and individual permit. And secondly, to develop in conjunction with the RPCs an emergency response plan so that it's understood how we go about protecting users' rights and the environment in the situation of an extreme low water event. By event, I don't mean a day, I mean a couple of 3 years of really low water, and that we could have a problem. So in order to get a handle on that, I think an interim permit system should be set up. And the agency should just issue them to polling and just sort of document what their water use is, with the understanding that in emergency conditions, the amount of usable water from a source would change. And it was just something I couldn't quite get a handle on it by answering the questions. And then the state, in conjunction with the RPCs, should be creating emergency plans for their regions. And that was one of the questions asked. Is this a statewide program, or is this an individual, regional, whatever? That was brought to us by some experts also, that different states do it different ways. I see the emergency steps because of the difference in the water levels in the different areas of Vermont. And this year is proving no different at all, even though we are super wet down in the southern parts of the state. It's fairly dry, not drought, but dry, and drier in the northern parts of the state. So I think we should take full advantage of the RPCs and the fact that they have a regional plan, and that it could become an element of their regional plan how water users
David.
Need to respond under the conditions of the interim permit. And then lastly, the point that
David,
registration and the permit rule, registration should start and the permit rule process of adoption with public hearings, with public engagement through the agency should start at the same time. Um,
David, can you hear me?
More than you wanted in a different, slightly different form than you wanted it, but I think that's what we say. We want to take full advantage of the basin planning program. They're on the ground experience. We're into the third or fourth round of basin plans, and adding quantity of withdrawal to the plans isn't going to be a big step. It might take a lot of conversation at the local level, but it's not going to be a big step. And then no exemptions. We defer to existing regulatory programs until those programs change.
David, can you hear me now?
And that's an old rub of mine. I don't like exemptions. I never have.
David.
And I think the other answers are pretty straightforward. I mean, if you're going to have a permit, there has to be a conservation plan, and there has to be a clear understanding of what the permit holder would do in an emergency situation. And then lastly, interbasin transfers, strictly on, they are required to receive a 401. And it's I'm going to go to mute probably 2 seconds into my explanation. No? Okay. Anyhow, 401s for interbasin transfers, not a ban on them at this point. So as much of that as you've got, I hope it's helpful to give us a place to start conversations.
Jeff, can you hear us?
Hello?
Jeff?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
We
Okay.
didn't have a microphone for a while.
David, do you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe that's the reason for the fuzziness too.
Maybe.
I was hearing both David and you guys
Good.
Oh, okay.
trying to interrupt David, but David wasn't. I don't think he was hearing you.
No.
No, okay, so maybe, I wanted to really stop and get everyone's opinion on the registration and reporting program, those first 3 questions before we moved on to the rest. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Sorry, David. So I don't know who wants to go next in terms of giving some thoughts on the first 3 questions. Jeff?
Sure. Can you hear me still?
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. So as I think the entire group knows that, the ski areas are already subject to what boils down to a registration and reporting system. And, that has existed for many years, and obviously we expect it will continue to. But I think more broadly that a registration system more broadly applied to surface water withdrawals in Vermont is a good idea. I think that it will help us all to understand kind of the magnitude of what's going on out there. It may be more of an issue than we think. It may be less of an issue than we think. But I think that having a registration process to gather data, which, as I remember from the presentations that we heard last time on the regulated riparianism approach, the Joe de la Pena, and I'm sorry for butchering his last name, but that was really his first recommendation, was data gathering. And I think my suggestion to the group is that before we start crafting or trying to craft the nuances of a permit program, talking about individual permits or general permits or what have you, that there be a recommendation that the registration process occur and data gathering occur, so that we can really understand the magnitude of the concern. So, I think, as to thresholds for registration and monitoring, I guess my suggestion would be that it be as broad as possible, and that it be a relatively light lift, so that in the interest of getting data, that it's not something that is burdensome, difficult, costly, etc. That it's really just a way to gather data, and then from that, we would have the ability to be able to, make recommendations as to how to move forward, with the idea being that I think ultimately a permit mechanism would make sense. Again, in the specific context of snowmaking withdrawals, respecting the fact that there is a permit program already in place for that, and that's been successful. But anyway, that gets a little bit beyond just registration, but I just wanted to, sort of foreshadow what I was thinking a bit.
Thanks, Jeff. Others? Evan?
Yeah, I tend to agree with what Jeff just outlined. I think I made a plug in our last meeting that as part of this, an outcome of this group, that we recommend, or it would be my recommendation, that we recommend to have some sort of data analysis and report after a period of registration, however long that is, enough time to gather sufficient data to make sense of or to get a complete picture, or as complete a picture the state feels it can, of withdrawals within each unit, whatever watershed unit we're interested in, and then some sort of data analysis and report that helps the state and future committees understand, the relative magnitude of each of cumulative withdrawals in each area. Let's just see here. Yeah, regarding a minimum, threshold, I think the two numbers were 10,000 GPD and 20,000 GPD in the two other states that presented. I see from David and John's summary here that a half-inch pipe is about 20, if, I don't know where these numbers come from exactly, but if a half-inch pipe is withdrawing, I guess 24 hours a day, that looks like somewhere in the realm of 20,000 gallons per day. I guess I was curious if others had any thoughts on that minimum threshold.
I guess my thought would be, going back to the number one, should have stated after registration. If we as a board were determined, as Evan brought up, the 20,000 gallons a day, for example, as a threshold, anybody under that, would they need to apply for a permit or a registration? Or do we say anybody under that, anybody over that, then we need to have you registered?
I think, I think in the beginning, probably all users would register just to get an idea of the use, and then, whatever that value is determined probably later on. Whether there's a threshold, I think could be determined. Is that what I'm hearing people say is, you know, maybe we have this registration, just get an idea of what's out there, and then it's okay. This chunk is under this gallons per day, maybe doesn't need to permit or register. Or maybe need to register, but not be permitted or something like that. I think is what.
So what we may want to do is just go through the registration process to a broad outreach to say, okay, this many people are using it in whatever industry, and of those, once we know how many people are using the water, then before a final decision is made, we come back to say, okay, let's go back and say anybody who uses a 20,000 gallon a day threshold, that is whether to require a permit or not.
Yeah, I think that's what, was that what New Hampshire was doing? If it was, you need a permit if it was over 20,000 gallons.
Yeah, that threshold was 20,000. Yeah.
I think everyone was required to register.
Yeah, I think I agree that we need to understand the universe of all the users, and then permitting thresholds is different.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing that, you know, just thinking about it on the registration piece, you know, I guess speaking for myself, I'm not particularly concerned about a homeowner that sticks a sump pump and a garden hose in a stream a couple hours to run a sprinkler. And, you know, I guess, you know, so there's, even from the standpoint of registration, you know, it would seem like there's certain, you know, kind of minimal activities where that is, you know, something like that. First of all, how are you going to even find all those people? Is it not? It's not even worth it, in my opinion. And you know, I guess so. You know, does that mean then that even for registration, we need to think about what the right threshold is? Seems like we should, because I am not at all concerned about the, you know, the garden hose and sprinkler scenario.
Yeah, I mean, then, yeah, we should probably have a discussion of what makes sense. You know, I think I still have trouble thinking what makes sense for Vermont for a threshold without the data. Yeah. Ryan?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Comments I would share based on what I've heard through the first 4 meetings. It comes back to, you know, what is the, you know, potential impact that is trying to be understood. So it could be, you know, regulated and protected. I guess one of the questions I have moving forward is, where is the state seeing impacts of inadequate flow that's, you know, associated with droughts or not? So that's just kind of a standing question I have. And then thinking about whether the state should adopt reporting or registration, you know, standard. I think information gathering is essential before moving to a registration program. You need to, I feel, understand what the potential scope of impact to surface waters are, acknowledging there is a significant difference in the amount of withdrawal that one would need to make before you affect Lake Champlain Main Lake compared to some upland high gradient stream. And that's where the current standards, as I understand it, some of the de minimis, you know, withdrawals, like below that, you're not going to be impacting, you know, flow in that stream. And so this is all by way of saying, you know, I think it's all depends on the stream, and where there should be, I feel, a threshold that, you know, below which, you know, reporting is just frankly not useful, because the volume of water going through that particular water course in a particular day, you know, even dwarfs our 8-inch pipe example from David Dean and John Groveman's, you know, report. Just a point of clarification, I think this underscores the approach that has been taken to regulating agriculture. Is that it says it makes an assertion that the RAPs requires all users to register. The RAPs only require those farms with more than 50 dairy cows or more than 50 acres in annual crop production to certify with the agency, leaving, frankly, 5,000 farms out there subject to the rules, but not reporting on a regular basis, and they follow the standards. And that's where I think that the current standards, de minimis, below de minimis withdrawals, do what you will, above which reporting is, good to understand what's happening within these surface waters. Because, you look at 691,000 gallons a day from a 4-inch pipe, and that sounds like a lot. And I was just, doing some math to try to understand what's happening outside of Montpelier today. And it looks like it's, 96 million gallons a day flowing over the Winooski right there. So a lot of water out there. Definitely know it changes based on the time of year. If the state were to adopt, I think we would need reporting before registration, and I think there should be a threshold in both cases. Thanks.
David?
I just wanted to add that it's not a single withdrawal that we're looking at. We're looking at a cumulative impact across a particular sub-watershed of the Connecticut River. And some of the gauging on the Connecticut River will show you that something like Sleeper's River is one of the best studied rivers in the Northeast. Long-term flow is 11 cubic feet per second. And if you did 2 or 3,
Breaking up. We can hardly hear you.
Maybe you should log off and then get back on again. Maybe it's
well,
Now you sound. Now we can hear you.
the idea is cumulative, and you can't look at just one withdrawal.
We can't hear you, David. You want to try to log back in? It's working.
I don't know if you can hear me at all. Cumulative.
David, you're very broken up. It's almost like your internet connection is poor, or maybe it's the connection suggests you try disconnecting and reconnecting.
Did you hear that, David? All right, well, David tries to work through that. Does others have thoughts on? No?
I guess regarding this minimum threshold for reporting, I don't know, can we think about a practical way per Jeff Nelson's example, a sump pump running so many hours a day for a reasonable period of time, or to set at least some floor that is reasonable, or is there an opinion in the group that any withdrawal should be accounted for?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Jeff that we don't need to get, somebody watering their garden. But I don't know if people do that. That's funny. I'm not. Is that a thing that people do? Is that?
I've gotten typically those people will call you.
Good.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I live here.
Yeah.
That's how I want to water my lawn and garden.
Right. And
I've seen it, having been out in rivers. I've definitely seen people doing that, and seen very small diversion withdrawals too for ponds, or even teeny ponds.
Right.
Yeah.
The ponds are regulated in other ways sometimes, but sometimes, and then it's, I mean, that's a related issue, but sort of a different issue as well. But I mean, I do think so. I think Jeff Nelson is right that we don't want to capture that. I don't know. I mean, I think if anyone is taking water that's not for like domestic, gardening and lawn purposes, and they're using it for the commercial purpose that inherently requires more regular withdrawal of water, or they're filling up their trucks with water, which, varies in size, but you see that all the time. I think that's what I would think we'd want to capture. I don't know how to delineate that exactly right now. I think we could figure it out, but I mean, I off the top of my head, I'm not. But I would agree that, with that distinction.
Do we, if we had this, registration or reporting, what requirement do we just define what we mean by, or what uses, commercial uses, and instead of assigning a gallons threshold on that point?
Or that,
Yeah, that's
I mean,
just a thought.
I mean, I think it makes sense for that sort of domestic,
So you state what you're not.
Yeah,
for.
right.
I would say, speaking from the construction industry, that any of these projects that go up to bid, highways or whatever, that require water, again, for dust control, compaction, the state already has a mechanism, I think, a way of tracking some of that. So some of these projects that do take place, where there is a withdrawal from a river for those purposes, that could be for contractors that are out there that could participate in this and say, yes, we use X amount of gallons per day on a daily basis, and this is what we need to fulfill these requirements. So there are projects out there that the state has underway that we could tap into and do a survey, at least at that level. Other areas, I guess, I can't really think, at least down our way, have a lot of projects like that underway. So it's not like everywhere you go and in every town, there's some type of that type of activity going on.
Right.
But I think the state could maybe, on the transportation side of it, go around and say, hey, what do you guys see? Just to give us somewhat of an idea how much water is actually being drawn. Again, keeping in mind some of the water drawn in cases if there's a municipal system, the contractors do make arrangements with municipalities or the fire districts to draw from hydrants and so forth. I don't know if you call that would be stream withdrawal, but
yeah, I think that in my mind that's different. But if there's a way to tap into it, I mean, I think I see municipalities, they draw water from streams, as part of their road work.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of it.
Yeah.
Although I do see that where they do have dry hydrants for their fire departments and so forth that go into some river flows. But that's a rare instance that they used.
But I think we just want to know. I mean, I think we're all sort of anecdotally based on things that we've seen. I think that's the whole point, is that I don't think it's a real burden to say to municipalities or any commercial entity that's relying on water, just tell us even estimate, but so we get an idea.
And I think a list to be made of, again, with contractors. I look at people that fill swimming pools. I mean, it's not uncommon. I think we've all seen it where an old milk truck is pulling up next to a river and they're pumping water and fill somebody's pool.
That's right, yeah.
And again, I don't think, maybe we come up with a list of realistic uses or practical uses that we observed, and maybe reach out to some of those people somehow and say, what do you estimate?
Right. Yeah, I mean, maybe we could work with our partners and V-Trans on some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the ag agency has information about, I've never seen that information about, farmers using water. If it's easily accessible, then please, share it. But I think that's a use that is clearly not home and garden and lawn, and as a starting point, I think we need to, in one place, like in your shop, Jeff, here's what we know, right?
I guess I would ask Ryan, Pat, Ryan, do you have any idea, in the agricultural field, how many farmers are drawing from maybe on a larger scale that may be pulling water out of the rivers for either crop irrigation or vegetable crops or something? Do you know of any statistics on that?
Sure. Raise my hand and I put it down if it's all right. I'll share. On June 21st, I shared a brief memo outlining where available figures for agriculture have been reported to this study committee. To answer your question specifically, based on the 2018 U.S. Department of Agriculture National Agriculture Statistics Service, they do not only the ag census that's published every 5 years, they also have an irrigation survey that they do on a bit more of a regular basis. It's still 5-year space, but it's on a different timing than the ag census. So 2018 is the last year that we have. 2023, I believe, is going to be the next time it is run again in Vermont. And what you can look between those two, and there's information on what farms withdraw at what size and for what sector. Of course, the irrigation census is far more illustrative into the details. And so 244 farms reported withdrawing surface water for irrigation purposes on 785 acres of cropland in 2018. Only 11 farms in the state report irrigating between 50 to 500 acres of cropland. That is a balance of both surface and groundwater withdrawals. So the 93% of the farms are small. So we have a lot of small veggie farms, really well distributed throughout the state. It's not concentrated in one county, where we see our dairy farms concentrated in 3. Based on the analysis I did, it was pretty evenly distributed. And so that's the information that's available. The scale of withdrawals, to David Dean's point, understand folks are looking for cumulative, but and understand that irrigation happens, during the growing season when stream flow may be lowest. But the scale of withdrawal, depending on the water body being used, it doesn't get down to that granular level outside of macro watersheds. So the specific stream being withdrawn is not reported in that statistical information that's available. But you can make a personal judgment or professional judgment about what the potential impact is. And it is distributed across the state, many more smaller farms than larger farms. We get sufficient precipitation based on historic weather data that even in the past 5 years, there's always been at least, even in the drought years, there's been sufficient water to get a crop. There are, of course, crop failures that happen, but the insurance claims that are made by farms for crop insurance, the largest single portion is from too much water, not from not enough water. So we tend to have the issue of too much precipitation at the wrong times. So I can re-forward that the brief memo to everyone. The citations are at the bottom, but it should be in all of your inboxes.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I did forward that around.
Yeah, and I do remember that, and I just think that, and it's helpful information, but I think it highlights the difference between like surveys and reporting requirements. And I think Ryan touched on one of the issues, which is we don't know the water body that they were drawing from, which I think is an important, with all this reporting is really important. To your point, it depends on, that's really important information, if you're taking a little bit of water from a giant lake, or you're taking, a medium amount of water from a small headwater stream. So I think we want to know all those things. So even if there is this scattered information that exists today, I think we would do a service by bringing it together here, right?
Right. Any, Jeff?
So let me just ask one quick question. When I think of reporting and registration, I kind of think of the same thing. And, I thought when Ryan was talking, he was sort of differentiating between the two. And I guess I'm not. I mean, I'm thinking that, if the initial step here is to gather data, reporting, I guess, you register and you report. It's sort of one and the same. But I guess maybe this is a question for Ryan. Are you thinking of those as two different things, or I guess just maybe I misunderstood what you said?
I certainly think there's a distinction between not just words, between reporting and registration. Whether it is required or voluntary reporting, or a registration program where you have to sign up and say, I am going to do this, I anticipate withdrawing this amount, and then reporting on what you do. I do think it is there is a distinction with a difference, perhaps not a large one, but the authorities or requirements that are put on a user to comply with either of those specific requirements, I do think it is different. The outcome may not be as far as data collection that I hear many are looking for, but I do think it would have a difference for the user that would be required to report or register.
Okay.
Gary?
Thank you. I just wanted, I hope you can all hear me. I just wanted to, I appreciate the conversation here. And from my perspective, I do want to just mention how important it is to collect these data at the local scale, because fundamentally it is about how do we sustain the businesses that are relying on water, the communities that are relying on water, our agricultural economy, and yet at the same time maintain our water quality standards for all other public uses and in-stream uses included. And so I think with that in mind, the more we can come together with in recognition of why we're here in the first place, should give some comfort, because I think we're all interested in the same thing, that is sustainable water use to maintain our business practices and our uses well into the future.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on the reporting registration questions?
I guess just kind of overall, like, what do you think? So we're sitting here, it's basically September 1st. So do you think, like what's the good with all of this? But we're going to go through all of these different questions. And, so this is a good example. Like, there were different perspectives. There was some consensus. How do you think we should proceed? Just like the next steps, you guys take this and start drafting something to reflect the options that
I think that's what we would do.
So I think at least from my perspective, it would be incredibly helpful for us to get some direction from the group on each one of these areas that's sufficient for us to basically pull together a graph. And from my perspective, the thing that it is going to be critical, I get the sense, so there's not unanimity, that there appears to be a consensus amongst the committee that some sort of reporting requirement is appropriate. I think the challenge is at what level or how are we requiring a reporting requirement, right? Like, upon whom does this requirement apply? And it's not, I haven't heard sort of like, is there some sort of, and we can do that in a couple different ways. You can say it applies to everyone except these certain activities are exempt or not subject to the requirement. We could do it based on a threshold amount. We could do it based on the infrastructure, right? Is it a permanent withdrawal versus some temporary withdrawal? All of those have issues with them. You know, I will just say, you know, even based on use, the agency, you know, I have personal experience dealing with an individual who decided to divert the flow of an entire stream to fill up their own private swimming pools and ponds, right? And basically eliminated a stream and refused to redivert it back into the channel, right? And we had to use extraordinary tools to enforce against this individual. So there have been challenges through the years that we have limited tools to deal with. And that, you know, depending on how we craft things, that's a private residential use. Right. They were filling their ponds and pools up on their
That's a good example. That's a good example. But that's exactly what, so that's like when you just laid out was what I was thinking, like what would be helpful. I don't, I mean, it might be, I mean, I like to think about it a little more. Maybe it could be a draft, and then it could be, you could, the different ways to do it, and then we can do homework also between the meeting by, you know, giving input. We can have votes, I suppose, at some point, but I don't think that there's enough. Like, I don't think right now it would be useful to sort of have a vote on like which way to do it.
I think that's fine. I think it probably, you know, to the extent that, I guess let me sort of ask the question, does anyone disagree with the statement that some reporting requirement is appropriate as an outcome of this process? Do we have, generally speaking, consensus around that particular point, or do we have disagreement amongst the members of the committee?
I agree with that.
I agree.
All right. So I think the issue then, and if members of the committee could sort of think yourselves about thresholding issues, and I think Jeff and I can also, before the next meeting, sort of send out some alternatives for people to think about, sort of getting much deeper into language. You know, this was intended to be somewhat high level and thought provoking. We can now get much more granular and give specific alternatives for people that almost is in the form of, you know, draft legislative language or something just much tighter and crisper for people to take a look at as far as alternatives. I think that sounds like something we probably do.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think the information you gather is really important to move ahead with everything else here.
Those are the next set of questions.
I
I know they'll have as much agreement as that. And then we'll see what wisdom Council Chapman has.
Well, and I guess maybe, I mean, just sort of plowing into that. I mean,
Right.
what is the committee's thoughts? I get the sense, just Jeff, from your prelude and others, that there's a little more hesitancy around jumping with this committee at this time with this data set into a permitting program. I guess let's just sort of start the discussion. It seems to me like there's less consensus there, or not consensus, in the absence of reporting data.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I feel like there should be a period here of data collection and understanding what's going on. Having said that, I think if we, as part of our report back to the legislature, wanted to, if we were in a position to be able to come to some consensus on potential framework or frameworks for what that might look like, just to set that out, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I feel like before we get really hung up on thresholds for general permits versus individual permits and so on and so forth, I feel like some baseline data collection really would make sense.
David, are you,
David,
is he back here? He was
He
gone.
came back on, then
Oh,
he
he's
dropped
gone.
off again, so I'm.
Because Dave and I spoke about this before the meeting, I guess just to kind of show two different perspectives. So I think, as representative of environmental interests or whatever that is called in this committee, I don't remember the exact wording. I think we're open to what Jeff Nelson just laid out, that we gather the data first, but we do believe, just based on what we know about impacts that exist today and what other states are doing, including our neighbor states, that we feel that we've concluded that we need to work towards a program to regulate withdrawals at a certain levels. I think we're okay with tiering implementation of the program, gather data first, register, get information. But what we want to avoid is coming back for another group to then establish a program. So that's one perspective that we have. And then in addition, we don't want to lose the thread of the innovation transfer issue, which is in a way kind of what started this whole thing, even though this group and conversation is appropriately, broader than that. And I think we think that if we were going to tier things in that way, data gathering, registration first, and then later move into implementing a program, we want to deal with the innovation transfer issue right away. I think I've heard throughout the meetings general agreement that innovation transfers, if they occur, should be regulated in some sort of a permit. That 401 doesn't apply to all of them. Still making rules wouldn't necessarily apply to all of them. So we would need something to fill that gap. So I just wanted to note that issue.
How many interbasin scenarios are there? I understand that
we don't know.
So that Jeff's been bringing up is the Killington's Pico ski area, withdrawing from the Woodard Reservoir, and then the Pico Mountain through its melting and everything else contributes to the Champlain watershed. How many other places in Vermont are there? And my take on this, Jeff, because you were hands-on, that project has been in operation for X amount of years. And from that, what type of impact has that created, or a negative impact or any impact? Has anything been done on that, Jeff?
Well, so the facility's been operational for just 2 years, and there's protocols in place that have been followed, but there hasn't been anything in terms of any impact or concern. But it was really, for example, if there was an aquatic invasive species that was identified in the Ottaquiche Basin, that was a concern, then certain actions would have to be taken, but that hasn't happened yet. So it's really something that would get triggered if and when there was an issue that had to be addressed. So, at this point, everything's working, and there hasn't been any particular concern. In response to what John said, I agree. I think that, there should be some more immediate action on or recommendation on the interbasin transfer issue. I don't think, I mean, this is the first time in my career that we've been working on anything in that regard, and so I don't think there's a ton of these out there or potentially out there, but I think that for both protection of water resources and predictability to the regulated entities, having some kind of understanding of what the expectations are makes sense, and I think that would be a valuable outcome of this process.
Jeff, do you know of any other projects in the state or anything proposed in that same situation or scenario?
I can't think of anything offhand. I don't know, Jeff Crocker, if you can.
I think we don't know. I mean, when it came up, it surprised us,
Oh, sure.
And then it was concerning because it raises just the potential for different kind of impacts. But I think you just having something in place so if it occurs, you can deal with it. What I've heard through these discussions is that there shouldn't be a prohibition against doing it that transfer if you could address the impacts. But the only way you could address the impacts is if you have some sort of a mechanism to say you got to meet these criteria if you're not going to do it. So it may happen never again. It could happen 10 times again. I don't know.
What's in place with the Pike-O-Killington process could be that classroom force. There's no.
Well, that was done through a 401. So 401 basically is a statement by Vermont that certifies that a project meets water quality standards, and that was looking at both the contributing watershed, i.e. the Ottaquechee, and the receiving watershed, i.e. Mendon Brook and the Lake Champlain side. So John's point, which is correct, is that not every project is going to trigger a 401 because a 401 is triggered by the need for a federal permit or license. So if you don't, for whatever reason, the nature of your project, you don't need a federal permit or license, then the agency has no authority to issue a 401. Sorry, Matt, I don't mean to be speaking like a lawyer, but that's my understanding.
I disagree with you, Jeff. You're rolling. I mean, I guess the only thing in just to sort of take one step back, I guess on sort of two, what I think are kind of incredibly important definitional issues, which is what is an interbasin transfer? Like, what are the basins that we're actually talking about? Because in this particular context, scale matters. We can scale down pretty small when we talk about basins. And is there, again, if we're talking about having some sort of control, whether it be a permit, a 401, a 401-like review, it's like, is there a threshold that's associated with that? Again, because if the basins are small, my guess is if we're using sort of our smaller scale basins, and frankly, even if we're using some of our normal planning sort of watersheds, around the edges of those basins, my guess is we're having a fair amount of transfers taking place. And if you think about it, the Champlain Water District is a series of interbasin transfers in the Lake Champlain sort of basin, right? Like that, they're taking it from Lake Champlain and shifting it into the Winooski, the Missisquoi, and around in the basin. So do they now need a 401 permit for the public drinking water withdrawal there?
Yeah, those are good questions. Is it okay if I just kind of catch David up for a second?
Yeah.
I know he really cares about this. David, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I think we got it.
So maybe the third time's the charm.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So I just kind of wanted to bring you up to speed and maybe bring you into the conversation because I know these are the issues that you care a lot about. So I think we agreed with regard to registration. I think there was agreement that we should have a program, and we're gonna work on thinking about what the threshold should be. Before the next meeting, and A&R might provide some examples, straw proposals, and work through. And then we shifted into the permitting discussion, and I stated, and I want to give you an opportunity to clean up anything that I didn't say correctly, is that, we'd be open to, tiering implementation, having a registration, collecting data, but, we think that it's clear to us that we do need a program to regulate the withdrawals at a certain threshold. We wouldn't want to, it could be tiered, but we wouldn't want to have to come back with another committee and like leave that as a, as a completely open question that this is not something that Vermont needs. And that kind of just, that's as far as we got on that, and people really haven't responded to that. And then I noted that there's the innovation transfer issue that we haven't talked a lot about. And that's what I see frozen now.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, is he gone? Is he gone? Let's see it. David, can you hear? All right. David, can you hear that?
Mike, yes.
Okay. So then we just started talking about the innovation transfer issue, and I think you've heard that conversation.
David, if you turn off your video, you might be able to communicate better. That might work.
Okay. Just,
Yeah, it's his internet.
well,
Yeah. His head is so big on this too.
I think what I heard was that everybody agrees that the 401 now only applies to federal act. With Killington everybody couldn't live with.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that kind, at least that kind of review occurs on interbasin transfers.
828-154.
Did any of that come through?
Do you have his text?
I'm sending them an email.
Yeah. Let me put in the chat. David, can you hear us? 828-154.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sporadic. We're going to give you the phone number in the chat. You can call into the conference room, and I think that would work better because it's just a telephone.
Okay.
All technologies. That way we could at least get, you could hear us and we'll be able to hear you. Yeah. So look in the chat for the number 828-1548.
Say it again.
It makes me long for the good old days when we were all around the table together.
That's what we just said. It does really help trying to work through these things,
Yeah.
Although you guys have been able to participate if you have a good internet connection.
Yeah, I'm on fiber. I'm on fiber here, so it works pretty well most of the time. Of course, I say that, and now it'll probably quit. But so I'm not sure where we are. We're waiting. Are Davey going to try to call in by the landline?
I think so. And then we'll put him on speaker and hopefully it'll pick up.
Because I do have Matt Chapman's question in mind about the scale of considering interbasin transfers, and I think that's something that's worthy of some discussion.
Hey, David.
Hi.
let me, so can you hang up off of Teams? 'Cause
Or
otherwise
we
you're
put
gonna,
it on
you're gonna, or put it on
Yeah,
mute.
because then we're going to get an echo.
Yeah, let me mute.
All right.
Okay, can you hear us, David?
Yeah, I can. It says I'm muted too.
Good, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Perfect.
Okay, so, great.
I think we're good.
Yeah, so we're good now. So I think we're gonna, I don't know if he needs to repeat, I mean, maybe we should slide into that question about the threshold. Because I think David correctly stated I think there was, at least among those who were talking about, understanding that 401 didn't always apply.
Right.
So can I
Getting
make a
some weird
recommendation?
feedback now.
Yeah, can I make a recommendation? David, can you hang up the Teams? Because we're getting basically the noise from the Teams through the speakerphone at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of background noise.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
log out of Teams.
Log out of Teams or hang up on Teams.
Yeah, just exit out.
Okay.
Close your computer now.
Struggle through the background noise. What I wanted to say was that the Killington event
Can you kick them off?
that Jeff and John and I participated in all came out pretty well with the 401 process applied to that interface transfer.
There we are.
And in our comments, we referenced that we should tie interbasin transfers as they occur, and it should be the large basins.
So the Connecticut,
Okay, so I'm still in on the phone.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're good. This is the best way.
Okay.
This is the best
Tie
model.
the interbasin transfers to a 401 process, and it can be done by reference. We do it all the time in state law. And that gives me, as an advocate, assurances that there will be a sufficiently rigorous review of the effects on both the sending and receiving basin relative to flows and relative to invasives and all of the other issues that we worked out. This is an opinion, but we worked them out amicably in the Killington Pico situation. And so that's really, in terms of what John and I are talking about, that we'd like to see that repeated for interbasin transfers.
So, Jeff, so just with Jeff Nelson, did you hear everything that David said?
I did. Yep. And so a couple thoughts there. First of all, the 401 piece, I certainly agree with him, and that in the Killington Pico process, the 401 as the vehicle for assuring attainment of water quality standards in the sending and receiving basins worked out well. But Matt, I guess I would pose this back to you. If you had a hypothetical project that didn't trigger a need for a 401, can you sort of come up with some legal way of requiring it anyway? I mean, or some 401 like sign off that goes through the water quality standards, all the the hydrology criteria, all the other criteria. Is there a way to do that?
So I guess my reaction is yes. We all, and Jeff, I think you were involved, but many of us worked on a new state statutory provision last year that sort of put statutory framework around the state's 401 process.
Yep.
I think that we could simply expand that process such that it includes these types of transfers in addition to federally licensed projects, so that it picks up things that are state-based, not federally based, but applies the same criteria and standards that we would to a federal project.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that, so you're talking about Act 32 on the 401 certification that we worked on.
I am, yes.
Yeah, okay. That actually makes sense to me. And then as to the scale, David's comment about the scale of basins and your comment about Champlain Water District, I think, and Jeff Crocker, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought maybe earlier on in the process I sent around a USGS document that has the hydrologic unit codes, and I was circling the Huck 6 basins that various parts of Vermont fall within. Did I send that around? I can't remember if I did.
I think you.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
I mean,
So that's the scale that I was thinking of. It's essentially the same as what David's talking about, but it's it's a little bit different. Like I think Lake Memphremagog is in a different basin than Champlain, but at least it's something that's quantified, it's known, and if you're proposing something that takes water from one of these to another, then you're into this review. And then it avoids the, Champlain Water District, or frankly, a lot of, small water systems, any town water system, you've got several streams in a town and you're taking water from here to there. And I don't think that's, at least again, in my mind, what we're really concerned about in the context of interbasin transfers.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jeff. And I think that, no.
Oh, no, don't let him in.
Oh, Monty Python sketch.
hey, David.
Yeah.
Okay. You couldn't hear on Jeff?
I can't hear the people at the far end of the table, but I can hear you clearly.
That is Jeff.
No.
Well,
close
he
enough.
must be using his computer to plug in things too.
No, he's in the room. Could you hear Jeff Nelson when he was talking?
Yep,
Can you hear me, David?
yes.
All right, so it's just you.
So I think we have a proposal on the interbasin transfer.
Yeah, I was not aware until this morning that work had been done on the Vermont version of the 401 and a process for it. So, I presume we went through something like that, Jeff, and, we, as I say, ended up with an amicable agreement.
He's shaking his head yes.
Yeah, I told David this morning when we talked about, Chapman, we synced up. I had said we just made some changes in statute related to 401 that I thought could relate to this issue. So I had the same thought when we didn't talk about it. I don't know. So that's so it seems like there is.
And this scale issue was the major, like Connecticut and.
Yeah, that's what we suggested.
Okay, all right.
We agree with that.
Yeah, Connecticut, the Memphremagog, Connecticut, Lake Champlain, or the St. Lawrence, Connecticut to the Hudson, that level of transfer. Is that what everybody's talking about?
That's what my
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, I'm gonna sort of switch around so I'm facing the mic. But so it sounds to me like there's at least the framework of a consensus around a process that would create an extension of our existing 401 process to interbasin transfers that with basins being defined at the sort of Huck 6 level as sort of a starting point as a review for the agency. And I guess my question becomes is, and I see Carrie's hands up, so I'm gonna stop and let Carrie talk.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Council, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I know we talked about this in the first meeting or two about scale. And I had given a couple of examples from my own experience, professional experience, where there was more of a watershed-based transfer. The project never went forward, but the impacts were going to be pretty substantial. It was potentially introducing nuisance species to one of the few Vermont outstanding resource waters, designated waters, and the not to mention some hydrologic impact. So I am a bit concerned about the maybe this is just an incremental decision in terms of when you have an interbasin transfer, how would we manage it? But I think it may be worthy to contemplate a Huck watershed scale size that could also benefit from having a type of 401 review.
So, Perry, what level? Is this a sub-watershed of Connecticut or the Champlain?
Well, for example, in this particular project, I know they were transferring it within a watershed scale. It was a transfer between the Poultney and the Main Direct into Lake Champlain. And so I raise this that it can occasionally occur. And so maybe that this process is trying to look at logical ways to manage proposals of interbasin transfer at certain scales. And council may be correct with a scale as or a project as large as a interbasin transfer at a Huck 6. This is a logical way to go, but perhaps at a watershed scale at a different Huck, we may also agree that this may be a logical mechanism for reviewing other projects that could have impacts at that watershed scale.
So Carrie, in that project where they were going to withdraw water and put it into another water body that was in the same watershed, like the Poultney, or?
Yeah, in this particular project, it was pulling water out of Lake Champlain and then discharging it into the Poultney. The project didn't go forward, but for other reasons, you know, mostly economic. But there's, I just think that we ought to be thoughtful in terms of a consistent approach that could ensure that we're applying the right kind of review to be able to affect the outcomes we want. And fundamentally, it's about water quality standards for other users, as well as in-stream quality.
So again, I think, you know, just to step back, Harry, I mean, you know, I was sort of putting out what I was hearing by members of the committee. I mean, I'm not trying to force any opinion, and I think it's open for discussion amongst people about what scale we want to be regulating at. And I guess, so yeah, so I mean, right now we're talking about having some form of 401-like process at a watershed scale, and I think the conversation is at what scale of watershed are we talking about? You know, David And Jeff threw out sort of this larger water scale approach. I hear you saying you'd like to think about doing it in a smaller watershed approach. I'm just going to throw it out there, for discussion, right?
Jeff?
I guess I would be concerned about going finer than Huck 6. I hear what Carrie's saying, and I think there is certainly potential for things like that. But I guess I come back to we should walk before we run, and I feel like this it seems like a logical level where you're talking about kind of a wholesale change and where the water's going by defining it at Huck 6, and maybe in the future there'll be interest in having a finer gradation, but I guess I'm not seeing the necessity of that at this point.
I'll just chime in on that. Would there be assurances in this, or could there be assurances in this permitting process, even if there's an interbasin, quote unquote, interbasin transfer at a smaller watershed scale, to address some of the concerns that Carrie outlined, independent of this like bigger picture? Are we moving water from one outlet to the Richelieu River versus Long Island Sound, And I guess I'm just trying to get at, like, what are the underlying issues that makes those two different? I can certainly understand the invasive species concern, because that, taking one from the Winooski River Basin and putting it over the hill to Connecticut, certainly I can understand why that's a concern. Although I don't know why it wouldn't also be a concern to, putting an invasive species from the Winooski into the Lamoille. I mean, we had similar concerns when Rocksnot arrived, 10 years ago. So I'm wondering about, like, what is it that about these transfers at these different scales that we're concerned about, and perhaps that can help us dictate or hone in on what the appropriate scale is.
Well, if I may, we have as we all know, a channel protection flow standard for stormwater around a certain size, and so there could be hydrologic impacts. I see out west where, because of I know they don't have the riparian law. They have first and right appropriative water rights, and yet I've seen firsthand, professionally, being out there for river restoration work and seeing water being diverted out of one watershed to another to such an extreme that they've actually had to restore the water to just assume a different in-stream flow. And I know that's extreme in a area of a different climate, but if I know we've always had a struggle with how to preserve or protect in-stream flows during low flow periods of the year for meeting our flow components of our water quality standards. And so just trying to flag the potential for that seasonal hydrologic impacts that could occur depending on the type of demand and the size of the demand given the watershed scale or size. And maybe that leads to a different set of questions, a different model beyond it, and maybe, as Jeff had mentioned, needing to walk before we run, maybe that data gathering is a strategy for how to keep that concept of scale on the table by looking at kind of what data do we need to collect to get a better sense for how to manage our water supply.
Yeah, if I could just respond to that, I think I would hope that this permitting program would, like if someone is proposing to withdraw water from, for example, the Pulteney River, and it's at such a scale that it's a concern, whether that water ends up in another nearby river just over the hill, or withdrawn from the river altogether and used for some purpose that it doesn't return back. And perhaps, I guess what I'm getting at is, regardless of the fate of it, I think the potential hydrologic impact and all the scaling and quantification that I can imagine this program, our permitting program, being built around to discourage an adverse impact. That's what I'm wondering. Like, does it really matter where the water ends up? I think it's going to get scrutinized one way or another. I don't know. That's just my thought.
David?
Permits for wastewater treatment facilities, that the agency has and does evaluate, things like the, length of the mixing zone based on flows, based on the discharge. That influences what is an acceptable discharge level. And that they monitor for, at least in the Champlain Basin and the Connecticut River Basin, for nutrients. As part of the 401 process for hydro FERC license and non-FERC license, you bypass reaches, you measure for the wetted area and what is a healthy flow for those reaches of river that are affected by hydro projects. And I know that you have an ecological index process for wadable streams. And I wanted to ask if it were possible that the agency might take some of those processes and use them to modify the very gross transfer between what you call them, 6 watersheds, and being able to, by virtue of the impact, decide whether or not a 401 is triggered for smaller sub-watersheds, the large ones. And I don't expect an answer now, but since we're going to be thinking about putting pen to paper to try and bring some resolution to this notion of 401s for interbasin transfers, whether some of that data or some of that information, some of that process can't be used to expand the trigger in order to address issues that Representative Stoll put on the table.
So the other thing, David, just
Almost a rhetorical question.
sure. I mean, the other thing just to sort of put out there, since, again, just more as a point of information than anything else, is that something like Representative Dolan was talking about is likely going to require some degree of in-stream dredging and filling that's likely going to trigger a 404 permit by the Army Corps of Engineers. which will trigger the agency's 401 authority, allowing us to put water quality conditions. I mean, again, when you're dealing with hypotheticals, there's a lot of variation that can happen, and whether permitting jurisdiction triggers or not is unclear, but I think it is likely in those situations that either a stream alteration or a 404 permit is going to be required, both of which opens the door for the state to impose conditions based on the water quality standards.
Exactly.
Well, that would make a very useful preamble.
I certainly think we, as we draft the report, could clearly identify existing areas where the agency exerts its water quality based authority, whether that be through Act 250, for federal permitting programs, or frankly state permitting programs where we apply water quality standards as conditions in those permitting programs, and then talk about the areas, frankly, that we're trying to, I think that there is some consensus around, at a minimum, we're gap filling, or at least identifying whether gaps exist through the registration process, and where we believe that they do, expanding a state authority to sort of cover that authority. So I think that if, again, assuming no one objects to that framework, I think that's something that Jeff and I can sort of draft as a sort of preamble or a first cut of things for the committee to take a look at.
So basically, something like what Carrie identified, okay? So somebody had a project, they want to pipe water 4 miles from Lake Champlain to Pulteney River. That's not going to be reflected in our little survey to find out who's using the water. That's a substantial project that many other agencies will be triggered to act on and respond to automatically with I would think, our jurisdiction and the way our permit process is structured.
I mean, again, right. I think, when dealing with a hypothetical, I mean, I think it's likely that either A&R permitting jurisdiction or Act 250 permitting jurisdiction, assuming it's a commercial development, would get triggered by this, which would allow the state to come in and put conditions on to protect water quality. So, I mean, I guess the only other thing, again, to just put out there as far as if the committee had some degree of concern, again, about sort of gap issues, you could give A&R discretionary authority if we identify something that basically violates water quality standards from a withdrawal perspective, and allow us to impose conditions upon that withdrawal. And I'm sort of thinking either expanding the existing authority that the state has under Section 1272 of Title 10, so that if we, again, my example of the individual who decided to divert a stream, that we clearly have the authority with withdrawals to impose conditions to basically have them restore that stream, or have something else. So again, I just throw that out there as again another potential to deal with gaps, not as a permitting type approach, but as an approach that basically says if you've done something, we can issue sort of an administrative order that says, okay, you've got to put that stream back in the banks and clean up the mess that you've made and restore things.
Right, well, you can do that now.
Well, 1272 is limited to discharges or wetlands violations. It doesn't cover withdrawals.
Right.
Yeah, no, that would be a helpful clarification if that's the case. Is 1272, that's what you use for the pond example that you?
Well, we actually used different authority. The Department of Fish and Wildlife had some sort of antiquated authority that they brought to bear in that particular instance. That ultimately it worked, but it was an innovative and creative use of existing
I
authority.
did make a note of that. I mean, that wasn't, this group wasn't established specifically to deal with those type of situations, but I too have seen, when I've been a regulator, all kind of shenanigans like that. And I've seen wetland rules often used sometimes to deal with it. And I do think that is a problem I don't think it really fits into this box necessarily, but, anyway, but, I would support expanding 1272 to be clear that it applies to withdrawals. And Carrie, does this make you feel, I mean, all this is, you know, we're talking, we're gonna have drafts that'll kind of frame out, like, in this case, the section on, interbasin transfers and what the thresholds will be. We'll all get to come back and revisit and talk about it, but does that give you, does this seem to be heading in a direction, Carrie, that addresses could address some of your concerns? Is she on there?
Yeah, Carrie?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Council, for, I think it's helpful to think about it in terms of gaps that we're trying to address. So I appreciate that. One thing we did talk about in our earlier meeting that I think we should just dedicate a little bit of time in this report is the importance of water conservation and water efficiency. We have the technologies, there are opportunities across the board, across sectors, and it's all about the wise use of our existing water resources that can only benefit the environment and to help ensure, you know, the availability of water. Not to suggest that's an area that we need to dedicate quite a bit of airtime or ink on the paper, but I want to flag that as an important element to this discussion.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Jeff?
So just dialing back to Matt's comment, and Matt, I'm looking at the very beginning of the water quality standards, section 101A. The secretary may enforce a classification and these rules against any person affected thereby who, with notice of the classification, has failed to comply. So, given that the water quality standards include hydrology criteria, among other things, you don't think you have the authority now through the water quality standards to deal with those kinds of things?
I would never say that I don't have the authority, Jeff, but I think clarity in this particular area probably is warranted. I've always read that particular section as being more of the enforcement of the general classification of waters as opposed to the standards themselves. And it actually tracks, if you look at the statute, there's much better and much greater clarity around our ability to enforce the designations, Class A, Class B, and the sort of underlying sort of criteria in those designations. I will also say the enforcement authority that the legislature granted us there is a bit antiquated and clunky. It was written before modern environmental administrative enforcement. And, you know, that is well beyond the charge of this particular group's, you know, duties, but it probably is worth at some point taking a look at.
Okay, fair enough. I just was curious, so that makes sense, and given that, I think that probably it does make some sense to look at this a bit.
Yeah, I think we've had this conversation in other meetings. Is that, I mean, you know, we have a hydrology policy, we have general standards, but without a permitting mechanism or something, without a permitting mechanism, false enforcement, and then 1272, 10 VSA 1272, because that does allow the agency to basically craft an order with conditions and require action. But those, you need that mechanism, you know what I'm saying? You need either a permit or there's something in 1272, and 1272 is powerful, but it is remedial, right? If something happens and then you're responding to it, right, and then you're trying to fix it, and you do have authority to require that. And I think we're trying to get out in front of it, you know. That's how I've always viewed, you know, this exercise, like other exercises we've gone through when we've crafted, you know, we fill gaps in the regulatory system.
I lost where we were. Anyone else have additional thoughts on any of the topics we've been talking about? Yeah. I mean, one thing I think you were talking about is, and just putting it out there, is the need for some sort of permanent program.
Yeah, we haven't
We kind
hit
of
that
skipped
one.
into higher.
Yeah.
I'm not that we're gonna get into it, but I don't know if other, maybe we.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to, I mean, I think that's sort of, so I think that that was a really good discussion about innovation transfers.
Right.
Seems to be good framework there, good framework around reporting. I do think that this issue of how to, if we tiered this to first gather data, when, how do we move into the second phase of it? And so David, what I said, I don't know if you heard me last time, is that I think we would be open to tiering it, but with, we feel that we know now that we want to fill that gap. Kind of just what I said, we don't want to just rely on remedial authority. At some threshold, I agree that we don't need to set it now and answer all the questions that Jeff Nelson said, general permit, individual permit, what all those thresholds, but is there, how much agreement is there that we want to have a program?
Right, yeah. David?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the question of, okay, you're in an emergency, you have a drought, extended drought, and now users and ecosystems are beginning to suffer what steps being taken. Devising that based on what we heard from the folks who spoke with us last week takes some time. And I would like to argue that we should not wait until we have sufficient data to move forward to begin the process of figuring out what we're going to do when we do have a problem. And I don't think that counters anything that's sort of the concerns about how do you put a permanent program in if you don't have the data. The whole notion of how do you respond, that could be presented to the regional commission, to the Connecticut River Joint Commission, the Lake Champlain Basin Program, and others that have capacity to assist the agency in thinking through based on what other states have done. We're not going to invent the wheel here, but based on what other states have done about how we would respond. And I think it would, I think we'd be remiss not to put that in motion at the time that this whole thing continues to move forward. That said, in terms of actual having permits in program in place, I understand it's going to take time, and it's not going to happen right away. Nothing ever says if you're in the permitting world, but I wouldn't want to leave behind the notion of we need to have an emergency plan.
All right, everyone agrees, that's great. We can move on to the next.
Emergency.
That always gets people talking.
There. Is there any thoughts on the emergency plan? Carrie?
I wonder if this is, if we could potentially rely on the hazard mitigation planning process to help identify what is that universe of potential emergencies that could result in such a demand that's a statewide plan. I think it's an exceptional plan, and it does try to cover kind of the potential universe of disasters that can occur. And I think those are person-made or weather-made disasters. I throw that out as, as something that it's worthy to be thinking about. I agree. It's when emergency occurs, it's too late to have a a real complex process in place. But we ought to try to mitigation planning process, or maybe in this context of future recommendations, thinking about what it is that we're trying to mitigate. It could be, climate driven and weather driven. So anyway, that's my kind of reaction to that question.
I don't know if it's something that we could, I know they're trying to get the drought task force, or whether we discuss with them if we've got an emergency.
I guess, and to sort of move on to what Carrie was saying, I'm just sort of looking around to see whether there are any existing planning processes that the state undertakes that this could get added to. And I guess one of my questions is, what is it that we're planning around here, right? Like, because, are we basically trying to come up with a plan in the case of scarcity to allocate water amongst users, or, I guess that's my question. What is it, what is it that we're actually planning around, and then how would we charge these entities to sort of plan around it? And just setting at the broadest level.
I guess if it was an emergency, people using the water would take things into their own hands.
Well,
take that chance.
I mean, part of this is that if we're in a drought emergency, we have some existing authority under public water supply rules and other sort of tools that we have to require conservation and we've never entered into a phase where we've had to tell users they can't use water. And I guess, the challenge that I'm just putting out there is that in the absence of positive authority that allows us to restrict uses, then we only have jurisdiction over the things that we have jurisdiction over. So for example, if you're a person who withdraws for a commercial or industrial activity that doesn't have a permit with A&R, we'll just put it there. I'm not certain what we do in the case of how we plan around that, how we manage that in an emergency situation. So I guess that's my long-winded way of saying it's not clear to me what Jeff and I are supposed to sort of put out there as a concept in this. Is it a sort of mandatory element of regional plans where they start allocate uses within the region, identify users and allocate uses within the region? I'll shut up. I see David has his hand up.
Hey, David?
Well, going back to just the whole notion that on discharge permits, DOD concentrations and whatever are based on a 7 feet band flow. What happens if you hit it? What happens if you exceed it? Go lower than 7 feet band. There's nothing else in terms of the question of what are we going to do in exceptionally dry times. The agency internally, because so many of the permits that you issue, including drinking water and distribution, rely on the flow or the lake level system in the state, I believe, Burlington, or South Burlington, or whatever it's called, the one that feeds both those communities, draws directors from the lake, whatever the lake level is, 85 feet. So internally, the agency should begin thinking about what they will do in their with their permit, and maybe by in that process, extending it, like in fact, or expanding it for others, might be a product that comes out of that work also.
Your thoughts, Jeff?
I wonder if it makes sense on this topic to, if Jeff, you and Matt can kind of write up a framework of, kind of how to deal with, emergency needs, emergency water needs. I mean, I think that, probably needs to be something that gets considered, but I guess I see that as a, relatively small issue compared to our overall charge of where we're going with a potentially a permit program, et cetera. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have a problem with coming up with some kind of policy or guidance on that, but to me, that may be a lesser issue than, some of the others that we're working on.
Okay. Ryan?
Thanks. I feel the intersection between prospective water use planning and times of scarcity, there's a nexus there with the Vermont Climate Council, perhaps Rural Resilience or Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee, as they work to understand climate trends and needs into the future. Not that this group couldn't make a recommendation, just trying to make folks aware of that parallel process that is ongoing. As we look towards how to allocate waters in time of scarcity, I think the groundwater withdrawal program, 10 VSA subchapter, well, section 1416 through the one I'm looking at is 1418, the groundwater withdrawal permits. I think it sets out, I think, a framework that is useful to consider, which is a permit issued under this section shall be valid for the period of time specified in the permit, but not more than 10 years. A permit issued under this section shall include the following: that groundwater withdrawals from a well or spring for drinking water supplies, farming, or dairy processing shall be given priority over other uses during times of shortage. And thinking about the ability for Vermont to have drinking water as well as food necessary, or as well as for the production of food, I think are important considerations that the groundwater withdrawal program, that framework should be considered for if we are talking about prioritization for surface water uses. Thanks.
Thank you. I lost where we were in our questions. Hearing implementation. Sorry?
I think that's where we were until we went back. We were about to talk about tiering and implementation or something along those lines. But maybe that's not.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about tiered implementation if you want, but I don't know if we have any sort of proposal to talk about.
Well, I think
this is the idea.
I think the first step, so I'd put on the table like that we would be open to that approach. What do people think? Just about how to, so that like just to kind of walk it through, just to kind of put it back in context. So you seem to generally agree registration, staff reporting. It's generally agree interbasin transfer. Just generally agree that emergency planning should be somehow, and I think good questions about what are we asking people to do, but work on that. So so I guess the main question is, how do people want to deal with and trend going from reporting registration to regulatory program, with the caveat that David and I, who pushed this issue probably more than other people on the committee, are saying we think hearing makes sense, but we want to see it recognized in the report that we need to move. We don't need to work out all those details right now.
But a plan to how we move from whatever we.
Yeah, and how, how, like, I think, we want to try to avoid like another like legislative, like that's something that we could move into, like, or the agency can move into without legislative intervention.
So let me just ask the question, is what you're recommending that once the agency gets 3 to 5 years of data from the registration program, that they report back to the legislature on what the data shows them and recommendations for a permitting program if it's indicated by the data? Obviously, the environment would be bigger.
Well, that's actually what I think I'm more leaning towards. I think John doesn't. I think what I heard, John, is that you don't want to. You want to basically set the framework now and not have to go back.
But yeah, I want to go back to the legislature. I agree that the data should inform the decisions about the program, but I wouldn't want to go back to the legislature if people agree that, like New Hampshire, for example, we should have a program. It's just that we can't craft the details of that program right now because we want to look at the data to guide us. Does that make sense? David, do you want to help me out here?
Yeah, well, and it's not carte blanche. I'm not suggesting that the agency has a free hand in terms of anything that they might want to do. I think they ought to bring the draft rule back to the committee of jurisdiction, and so that Representative Stolen and others get a chance to comment on it before the official APA process starts. In other words, that there is in fact and a legislative check on how it will move forward. But I tend to agree with John. I think if we put one piece in place now and the whole thing doesn't move forward as a block, if you will, then everybody remembers what happened to the state plan under Act 250. What we're suggesting is that let's start moving this whole thing forward as a block. Nothing goes into effect until the data is collected and the draft rule comes back for a legislative review by the committees of jurisdiction.
Other thoughts?
Yes, I guess I want to think about that a bit more. I mean, I hear what Dave and John are saying, and I think that we're all here now. We're focused on this. We're thinking about the issue, and I think that there's some value in trying to lay out a framework. But I also feel like there's considerable work to be done to understand the results of the registration and reporting, and that may be very. I think it will be very helpful to understanding what ought to be done, and So, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some middle ground where our report recommends a permitting approach, but and maybe establishes some general framework of it. But I guess I'm a little reluctant to sort of recommend at this point that the agency start drafting a water withdrawal rule and permit program. But I'm certainly open to talking about it more.
Ryan?
Thanks. So looking back at the history of how we got Act 173, H833 of 2020 raised the issue of the interbasin transfer of surface waters, right? That was the main question. And I think that's one where we've had rich discussion about what is a basin, how much of a transfer could trigger it, and learning that there's new authorities for ANR to manage that outside of 401 permit. Many of the other investigation work into other surface water withdrawals and trying to understand if there is an issue, is there a challenge, does the state need additional permitting authority? I don't know if you can propose a regulatory structure absent data to inform size, scale, scope, and what may be needed on a particular stretch of water. So I would think that one would need to engage in fact finding, whether that's survey, registration, reporting, enhanced monitoring. I don't know. But I think that would be needed before moving into proposing a scheme of individual, general, or other types of regulatory structures. Acknowledging that the interbasin transfer is perhaps distinct from the question that we began tackling at the beginning of this meeting, which is on the broader question of surface water withdrawals, reporting and permitting.
Thanks. Any other thoughts on, John and David's comments? So see where that leaves us. Oh, sorry, Carrie.
Oh, no worries. Just a quick question. It may be helpful in this report to just describe the framework that other states are using. We heard from a couple of states, and I think that's always helpful to understand what other states are doing in this context.
Okay.
So, at the risk of making my compatriot David unhappy, maybe David and I, I really appreciated that discussion and took a bunch of notes on what people said. I mean, since we're proposing this, maybe we can come up with a proposal that people can then react to on how to deal with this issue in the report. And we could talk about it before next, we could circulate it. I don't know when our next meeting is going to be, but I think it's fair for us to, since we are pushing the issue, to propose kind of how to deal with it. And then, David, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm certainly willing to, help out with that.
Just to move it forward.
Right, you put what you guys are putting forward so that we have something to look at and digest.
Right.
That's why we circulated a response to your questions, Jeff, and then for the most part, they were very helpful in clarifying my thinking, and John's, and, it gave us a framework to talk to each other today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts and others sharing their thoughts on what they're thinking. And as we try to move towards kind of bringing the committee consensus where we can find it together as we start, thinking of drafting this report to the legislature.
Okay, so we'll work on that,
Okay.
and that will be available before the next meeting, and we can, people can react to it, and we can talk about
Yeah, I think that's a good plan, and then, we have a lot of writing to do as well.
it. Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't see this supplanting the agency putting together the pieces that identified that information-wise and direction-wise would be helpful to the committee. Today's discussion has been informative.
Yeah, and I'll work with Matt to start drafting some of the, areas where we have found some consensus on the broader topics and, put some language together and some ideas for the committee to look at. And John and David will look at what they're thinking in terms of permitting and share that thoughts with the committee. I don't know if there's, a lot of this is around scoping of permits that was left, and I think we're largely at a standstill with some of these questions that were left. So I'm not sure we have much more until we get.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, we continue to use it as a framework, but also think about tailoring whatever we propose to, the sequence of reporting and gathering data and the next step, really.
Okay.
So I would agree. It's premature to get even.
Yeah, and I don't want to have that conversation unless we have something to look at. So maybe I'll start scheduling the next meeting. That makes sense.
I think that's on the next item on the agenda.
Yeah. I'm looking my calendar like the week of September 20th, 27th, either that week or the week after. So September 20th that week on Monday, or September 27th.
September, I'm sorry, Jeff, that was September
Right?
20th or 27th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Either of those are fine with me.
I personally would have a slight preference for the 27th if that were possible and worked for others.
I'm going to maybe suggest a little bit further on.
What day do you have in mind?
The first full week in October.
I can't do Monday that week of August 4th.
Well,
That's
the
it.
next Monday.
I can do August.
That's October
11th.
Yeah. How about the Tuesday of October 5th? Or no?
That's fine for me.
No, it doesn't work for Sam.
Monday works better.
Mondays work.
I can't do the Monday the 4th.
Okay. I can't either.
About the 11th.
I'm a little concerned about pushing it out too far,
I know,
though.
I mean, because if we're on October 11th, that's really only 2 more months until we have to have a legislative report. That's kind
I
of,
wouldn't go ready.
is there any way?
People stay.
I surrender.
Okay, I think we're back to the 27th of September. And we'll plan, I'll send out an invite later, 1 o'clock again, and we'll have an in-person option and a Teams option again for people.
Yeah, and I don't care what COVID's doing. I am tired of
I'm gonna quote that one. I'm gonna tweet that out later. David, I don't care what goes.
We got through it, David. We figured it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that was good.
All right.
Okay,
I think.
thank you all for,
Thank you.
Okay, yep, so long.
Bye.